Virginia Hall was not born to be a spy. She was born to be a diplomat. Hailing from a privileged, wealthy family in Baltimore, Maryland, she possessed sharp intelligence, an adventurous spirit, and a brilliant aptitude for languages, mastering French, German, and Italian. She studied at Radcliffe and Columbia, aspiring to enter the U.S. Foreign Service, the pinnacle of American diplomacy. Her early career saw her working in embassies across Europe, in Warsaw, Vienna, and later as a consular service clerk in Izmir, Turkey. It was there, during a hunting trip in 1933, that her life was irrevocably altered. While scaling a fence, her shotgun discharged accidentally, severely wounding her left foot. The wound became infected, requiring the dramatic step of amputating her leg below the knee. The disability, though overcome with tenacious resolve, created an insurmountable barrier to her diplomatic ambitions. The U.S. State Department, adhering to archaic rules, denied her application for the Foreign Service Officer program, deeming her amputation a disqualifying physical impediment. Virginia Hall was forced onto the administrative sidelines. This rejection, born of bureaucratic myopia, instilled in her a defiant resolve, a determination to prove that her spirit and her intellect were anything but disabled. As Europe marched toward war, Hall, confined to clerical work, watched with growing frustration. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, she quit her job and volunteered for the French Ambulance Corps, witnessing the brutal collapse of France firsthand. After the fall of Paris, she relocated to London. Her determination now focused on a single goal: to fight Nazism. Her extensive European contacts, language skills, and deep knowledge of French culture made her an ideal recruit for the Special Operations Executive, SOE, Britain's ultra-secret organization dedicated to setting Europe ablaze. The SOE, desperate for agents on the continent, disregarded the U.S. State Department's judgment. They recognized her fire. She was trained in clandestine operations, radio transmission, coding, and silent killing. In 1941, disguised as a journalist for the New York Post, Virginia Hall became the first female field agent sent by the SOE to the occupied territory of Vichy, France. For her work, she immediately adopted the codename Marie. But the most defining feature of her cover was the most vulnerable: her wooden prosthetic leg. Hall, with her characteristic dark humor, nicknamed the heavy, cumbersome appendage Cuthbert. Cuthbert was a source of constant, grating pain, its mechanical squeak a liability in the quiet world of espionage. Yet it was also the key to her cover. Who would suspect an American civilian with an obvious disability of being a ruthless Allied operative? Landing in Vichy, France, Hall quickly established her network in Lyon, utilizing her journalist cover to move freely and gather information. She was a master of improvisation, operating out of unassuming safe houses, including a Catholic convent where the nuns became her unwitting or willing accomplices, and building the first long-term espionage network in the region. Her duties were overwhelming and foundational: intelligence gathering, compiling meticulous reports on German troop movements, fortifications, and supply lines, escape routes, the line, organizing and funding safe houses and routes, helping downed Allied airmen and resistance members escape occupied territory, often smuggling them across the heavily guarded French-Spanish border. Resistance support, identifying, vetting and training local French resistance groups, or maquisards, preparing them for the inevitable mass sabotage campaign planned for the Allied invasion. Within months, her network, known as the Héron Network, was one of the most successful and resilient in all of France. Her coded radio messages to London, sent via a bulky, bicycle pedal-powered transmitter, were a vital source of intelligence for the Allies. The Germans, for their part, were beginning to notice the uncanny effectiveness of the resistance in the Lyon area. They detected the radio transmissions. By late 1942, Virginia Hall's network, known as the Héron Network, had become an invaluable asset to the Allied war effort. From her base in Lyon, She coordinated a vast web of resistance activities, collecting intelligence on German movements, sabotaging supply lines, and most critically, organizing escape routes for downed Allied airmen. Her efficiency and daring were legendary within SOE circles, but they also attracted the increasingly furious attention of the enemy. The German occupation forces, particularly the Gestapo, were growing desperate. They noted the surge in sabotage, the uncanny precision of Allied intelligence regarding German deployments, and the baffling disappearances of their own agents when they got too close to certain sectors. All evidence pointed to a sophisticated, centralized Allied operation. Unlike anything they had encountered from the French resistance alone, the Gestapo's intelligence began to piece together a profile. An American woman, operating with extraordinary skill, capable of inspiring fervent loyalty among the French. Their agents, using torture and interrogation of captured resistance members, eventually learned a key distinguishing detail. She walked with a pronounced limp, the hunt for La Dame qui boite, the Limping Lady, as she became known in Gestapo circles, escalated to a fever pitch with the arrival of Klaus Barbie in Lyon. Barbie, a notorious SS Hauptsturmführer, was the head of the Gestapo in Lyon, a man whose cruelty would earn him the moniker the Butcher of Lyon. Barbie, a meticulous and brutal interrogator, immediately recognized the strategic importance of neutralizing this elusive American agent. He considered her an existential threat to German control over southern France. Barbie issued a chilling personal directive to his agents, which would become infamous. "She is the most dangerous Allied spy in France. We must find and destroy her." This wasn't just a routine order. It was an obsession. Posters of a generic woman, accompanied by descriptions of her limp, appeared across Lyon. French collaborators were offered vast sums for any information leading to her capture. The pressure on Hall and her network became unbearable. Betrayals and arrests mounted. Safe houses were compromised. Her radio operator, a vital link to London, was captured. The Gestapo was closing in, systematically dismantling her carefully constructed network. Virginia Hall, the Limping Lady, found herself truly alone, surrounded by an enemy intent on her capture and execution. By late 1942, with Gestapo agents closing in on her last known safe houses in Lyon, Virginia Hall knew her time in France was up. Staying meant certain capture, torture, and the compromise of countless resistance members. Her SOE handlers in London ordered her to evacuate. Her escape route was almost unimaginably arduous. A grueling, clandestine trek over the snow-capped Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain. This was a brutal journey even for a healthy, experienced mountaineer, involving steep ascents, treacherous ice, and freezing temperatures. For a woman with a heavy wooden prosthetic leg, it was an act of defiant, desperate courage. Hall, disguised as an elderly peasant woman, began her journey. Each step with Cuthbert was agony. The wooden leg, not designed for such terrain, rubbed raw wounds on her stump. The cold seeped into her bones. At one point, she famously sent a coded radio message to London. "Cuthbert is giving me trouble." The exasperated reply from her handlers, unaware of Cuthbert's true identity as her prosthesis, was a brusque, "If Cuthbert is giving you trouble, have him eliminated." The irony was not lost on Hall. The journey was a testament to her unbreakable will. Enduring frostbite, searing pain, and the constant threat of German border patrols or local informers, she pushed herself through the unforgiving mountains. After several harrowing days, she finally descended into Spain, barely alive but free. Her escape was a profound humiliation for Klaus Barbie and the Gestapo. Their most wanted spy, the Limping Lady, had slipped through their fingers, leaving behind a trail of frustration and an intensifying legend. She had cheated death, but her work was far from over. Virginia Hall's escape to Spain was a temporary pause, not a retirement. After 6 agonizing weeks of imprisonment by Spanish authorities, who had a shaky relationship with border agents and the Axis powers, and subsequent release following pressure from the US consulate, Hall returned to London. Her British handlers in the SOE, deeply impressed by her survival and desperate for her unique expertise, wanted her back. However, Hall had a new agency waiting, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, America's fledgling intelligence agency and the precursor to the CIA, was eager to deploy its own agents in preparation for the massive invasion of Europe. Hall, the American woman who had successfully run the most valuable network in Vichy France, was their prize asset. She transitioned from the British SOE to the American OSS, maintaining the same furious dedication, but now working under the American flag. Her new mission was to return to France. But this time, the stakes were unimaginably high. She was to prepare the ground for Operation Overlord, D-Day, organizing the French resistance into a coordinated fighting force, capable of crippling German defenses the moment the Allies landed. The impossible journey. And the new persona returning to France was far more dangerous than her initial infiltration. After her famous escape, the Gestapo considered Hall the Limping Lady, a legend and a prime target. The risk of being recognized was too great. In March 1944, Hall made her triumphant, defiant return, arriving not by parachute or boat, but by crossing the French-Spanish border again, this time near the Spanish Basque coast. She traversed the rugged terrain on foot, relying entirely on her new persona. She had shed the identity of the American journalist, Marie, for that of an elderly peasant woman, Marcel or Diane, with her hair dyed grey and her face weathered by hardship. She also wore a more discreet but equally cumbersome prosthetic limb, which she still called Cuthbert. The risk was immediately apparent. The crossing itself was a perilous gamble, and Hall was soon transmitting messages back to the OSS headquarters in London, often from the remote Haute-Loire region. Arming the Maquisards, spring 1944, Hall's mission was no longer merely gathering intelligence. It was one of warfare and logistics. She was tasked with transforming disorganized bands of French patriots, Maquisards, into paramilitary forces. Her operational goal was to create a zone of chaos, paralyzing German troop movements towards the anticipated invasion front in Normandy. Operating deep in the rural heartland, Hall coordinated massive weapons drops from Allied planes. She received and distributed tons of arms, explosives and communications equipment, training local resistance groups in their use. Her genius lay in her organizational ability and her capacity to inspire profound loyalty. Her network swelled, eventually encompassing an army of nearly 1,500 Maquisards operating across several departments. The physical demands were brutal, even for an able-bodied agent. Hall was constantly moving, cycling, hiking, and climbing, all with her painful wooden leg, to inspect training camps, organize sabotage, and supervise her subordinate agents. The D-Day Inferno, Sabotage and Slaughter, June 1944. The true culmination of Hall's work came with the Allied landings on June 6, 1944. The code words, broadcast over the BBC, initiated a coordinated campaign of terror against the German occupation forces throughout the French interior. Hall's forces unleashed a planned inferno of sabotage. Rail lines, they blew up key sections of railway, derailing trains carrying supplies and reinforcements intended for Normandy, bridges and tunnels. They destroyed vital bridges and tunnels, turning German lines of communication into impassable choke points. Direct assault. Hall personally coordinated direct assaults on German military outposts and garrisons. The result was an operational masterpiece. Hall's Maquisards succeeded in diverting and paralyzing significant German forces that were desperately needed to counter the invasion in Normandy. One of the most famous successes involved her troops pinning down and severely delaying a regiment of the Wehrmacht's 11th Panzer Division, a critical delay that prevented that unit from reaching the invasion beaches at the most crucial time. Official records credit Hall's organized groups with destroying 4 critical bridges, killing an estimated 150 German soldiers, and capturing over 500 prisoners. Following the D-Day landings in June 1944, Virginia Hall's role evolved from sabotage coordinator to field commander. Her mThis forces, now well-armed and trained, transitioned from ambush to sustained offensive, shaking the very remnants of the German occupation in the remote regions of France. Hall directed her troops with an intelligence officer's precision and a guerrilla fighter's fierce resolve. She was everywhere, organizing the evacuation of German prisoners captured by her network, establishing clandestine hospitals, and maintaining a constant, vital flow of intelligence back to the OSS command in London regarding enemy disposition and defensive failures. The reports she sent were instrumental in guiding the Allied advance, exploiting the confusion her sabotage had created. Her prosthesis Cuthbert may have slowed her pace, but it never deterred her drive. The final culmination of her mission arrived when advance elements of the American military finally linked up with her established mThis units. The moment Hall shed the grey disguise of the aging peasant, Marcel, and presented herself to the uniformed Allied officers, the American civilian with the wooden leg commanding a small army of seasoned French fighters, was the silent, profound climax of her 6 years of solitary warfare. She had successfully completed her primary mission, not only surviving the Gestapo's most intense manhunt, but mobilizing a genuine military threat from within. The defeat of the Butchers. The Allies swept across France. The immediate confrontation with her nemesis, Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, ended not with a duel, but with his panicked flight. Hall had defeated Barbie strategically. The intelligence and operational network she built had been a thorn in his side, a constant humiliating failure that undermined his authority. While Barbie managed to escape Allied capture and continue his reign of terror elsewhere, only to be found decades later, Virginia Hall had won the contest of wills in France. She had survived his direct order to find and destroy her, and in doing so, had rendered his brutal efforts meaningless. Hall remained in France until the final German surrender in 1945, helping with the transition and mop-up operations. She was the definition of extraordinary heroism. Having operated longer in occupied territory and inflicted more strategic damage than almost any other single American agent, upon her return to the United States, Virginia Hall was immediately slated for the highest possible recognition. President Harry S. Truman himself wished to present her with the Distinguished Service Cross, DSC, the U.S. Army's second highest award for valor. The honor was historic. Hall was the only civilian woman in World War II to ever receive the Distinguished Service Cross. Yet, in a final act of devotion to the secret world she had mastered, Hall flatly refused a public ceremony. Her life, her security, and the safety of countless remaining agents and their families depended on her maintaining absolute anonymity. The fame that came with such an award was an intolerable risk. The award ceremony was therefore held in a small, private office in Washington, D.C. in 1945. Only her family, OSS Director General William Wild Bill Donovan, and a handful of senior staff were present. Donovan himself presented the medal, acknowledging her sacrifice of fame for security. This silent presentation became the perfect metaphor for her entire career. Heroic deeds performed for the sake of the mission, with the true scope of her courage concealed from the world. She was also decorated by King George VI of Britain with the Order of the British Empire, MBE, and received the French Croix de Guerre. But for decades, her story remained. For decades after the war, Virginia Hall's epic story remained a closely guarded secret. Her insistence on privacy and the inherent secrecy of her work within the fledgling CIA meant that the full scope of her achievements, mobilizing an army of mThis and crippling German supply lines for D-Day, was known only to a few high-ranking officials. The public knew nothing of the Limping Lady who had driven Klaus Barbie to obsessive fury. The official narrative of World War II often focused on the grand strategy, the massive armies, and the male heroes of the battlefield. Figures like Hall, who mastered the messy, dangerous world of espionage and paramilitary coordination, were deliberately relegated to the shadows. However, as decades passed, historians and biographers began to comb through declassified documents and interview surviving resistance fighters. In the 21st century, the full, astonishing truth of Virginia Hall's contribution finally emerged, securing her place as one of the most successful and important agents in the history of American intelligence. The CIA's silent founder, Hall. His role as a founding member of the CIA provides a powerful modern dimension to her story. Her expertise in human intelligence, network building, and clandestine communications, forged under the extreme pressure of Gestapo pursuit, provided the operational blueprint for the new agency. She brought the lessons of the field, lessons soaked in real-world blood and betrayal, to the bureaucratic desks of Washington. The CIA later honored her, albeit quietly, by naming a training facility after her, a final, fitting tribute to the woman who demonstrated the ultimate blend of operational cunning and personal resilience. The prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, initially a symbol of rejection by the State Department, became the defining feature of her legend and the ultimate metaphor for her resilience. Her disability, which should have made her an easy target, was weaponized by her intelligence and fierce determination. When German agents searched for a spy, they looked for a vigorous, athletic figure. They never expected to find the most dangerous operative in France, disguised as a humble, disabled civilian. Her limp was the perfect camouflage. Her endurance, especially during the agonizing Pyrenees crossing, proved that the spirit is stronger than any physical impediment. Klaus Barbie's final, frustrated declaration to his men to find and destroy the Limping Lady is now understood as one of the highest compliments ever paid to an American spy. It was the testament of the enemy's fear, a recognition that Virginia Hall was a strategic force, a woman who dared to confront the Nazi machinery with nothing more than her courage, her codes, and her indomitable wooden leg. Her story is not just a chapter in history. It is an enduring inspiration. Virginia Hall won the personal war against Nazism, against sexism, and against the limitations of her own body, proving that the most effective heroes are often those who refuse to fit the conventional mold. The spy they couldn't catch remains one of the greatest Americans of the Second World War.